Welcome to the Cannabis Detector Podcast. No sugar, all spice. With the industry BS detector in residence, Kristen Yoder. This episode is part of a sponsored series brought to you in collaboration with Quiver Financial.
Hello, my Cannabis detectors. Thank you for joining me for another special edition of the All Things Green series with my co-host for the series, Colby Mcfadden of Quiver Financial.
Hey there, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to do this third and final episode, really tying up everything we've talked about from the public market to investing in private companies and now to discuss where globalization will play out in the future of the cannabis industry, because like any other agricultural commodity, it is inevitable. It will happen. So it's something to keep in mind in your investing strategy. Where will the industry be in 2, 3, 5 years? So I'm excited to talk about this with you.
Yeah, it should be really interesting, as we talked about in the two prior podcasts when we talked about public or private markets, that this is an industry that is moving very fast. Like everybody's running around with their head on fire, and this process of what you would call normalization, where this industry starts to look like all the others out there. Probably happens a lot faster than we've ever seen before in any other industry that's come about its way.
I think the factor that will flip us into globalization will be national legalization, of which I'm a staunch advocate against, because I want our small mom and pop shops to survive. But I also know that that's not realistic in the end. And it looks like we're actually getting closer to legalization on a national level. And I don't think people really take into consideration what that means, because once it's open nationally, what's to stop us from opening up internationally?
Yeah, and from an investor standpoint, or investors looking at the cannabis industry, they really don't want federal legalization either. You really would prefer that it's just a rescheduling of in the classification. So then that way it still stays a states' rights issue, because as an investor, if you're still state by state, there will be dislocations within the industry. And as an investor, that's what you're trying to find, is you're trying to find dislocations where you can make some money to fill the gap. So I would say that from that standpoint, I completely am in agreement with you.
Actually, that's interesting, because someone I really don't like at all, John Boehner, was like the keynote for the cannabis industry at South by Southwest, which is just insane to me. But he was all about federal legalization, how the government needs to get with the times and legalize. And I don't trust that guy for anything, but especially when you haven't been pro-cannabis and you were against it, actually, and now you're all for federal legalization, and you happen to be on the board of one of the largest cannabis hedge funds out there. So, that's in conflict with what you're saying. Why do you think he would be pushing for legalization when he too is an investor?
Because for decades he's always worked for the highest bidder. I mean, that's what you do as a politician, right? I mean, that at the end of the day, that's who John Boehner is. He's the politician. And so, he was against the legalization move when he was in office because he needed votes. And, his focal points or his focal groups told him that, don't be in that camp. And now that they're the highest bidder and they pay and he's in retirement, sure, he's taking the money. So the reality is that, he's, when you look at the size of a company like Acreage, they're positioning themselves to benefit from that. And that's what I mean by, from an investor standpoint, you don't want that, because once it's all large corporations, once it's all S&P 500 companies, the opportunities for investors become much smaller and different.
So the irony is he's out there trying to rally individual investors to get into the industry, while really he's hoping that things will change so that they just dominate everything, which actually sounds pretty on par with John Boehner. And even more interesting, the ex-Prime Minister of Canada, who is very anti-cannabis, is also on the board. So
their marketing's ridiculous. Well, listen, they had a big marketing round that came out, and I forget exactly how it was termed, but it was basically saying cannabis investing for beginners. And I've been doing investing for over 22 years, all kinds of trading of different equities. And I can tell you cannabis trading and cannabis stocks are not for the beginner. So that was the hilarious part in my mind, was here's this quote unquote responsible public figure, and just from the angle of the marketing was really for beginners. Come on,
yeah,
guys.
so it's important to, question your sources always. I think that's part of critical thinking, is who actually benefits and who doesn't. And before you vote for legalization, like in California, you really need to question the motives of whoever wrote it in the first place. So what kind of investment should people look for when we're keeping globalization and normalization in mind?
Well, I think you want to think about investing in the path of that growth. So you want to look for companies or projects that are being built with that in mind. So, for instance, if you're looking at a cultivation investment, I would be really, really skeptical to be a big investor in small cultivation because at the end of the day, it's a commodity. And if this industry normalizes and the big money comes in, the Philip Morrises and the British Tobaccos and the Coca-Colas, all those guys, they're going to want large facilities that are built to scale. So in the cultivation space, I would look at that and say, hey, if I'm going to invest in that space, then I better go with size, because size is going to matter. And that's how I would look at that, all that space, whether it's cultivation or distribution or dispensaries, is just get ready for that large scale business and invest in front of that, and be in the things that could get merged or rolled up or bought up is in that process.
I would think you'd have a fairly small window to be able to get in ahead of being bought out when Canada is just consuming everybody. As soon as it looks like you're profitable, like I was talking to someone earlier, we can't blame people for selling out at the end of whatever. When they get their exit, they earned that. So it's difficult to know, when someone's really successful, it won't be as easy to invest in, or maybe you're not going to be able to invest in as much to make a profit off of it before they get rolled up. So how can you tell who's good when there's so much bullshit out there?
Yeah, that's the hardest trick. And that's there again, like we talked about in the previous episodes, is don't do this alone. Have a team, but have other people that you can take these ideas to and get a different viewpoint, because unfortunately in this space you are going to have to act quick, because a good example is just a handful of months ago, a company like Verano raises, I believe it was about 160 million, and then just 2 weeks ago they're gobbled up by Harvest. So
for like 760 million or something like
that. Yeah, it's crazy. So I mean, these things are going to move fast. So as an investor, looking at the track record of the people that you're investing in is helpful, but more importantly, you've got to have a team around you that when you have an idea that you can take to, and they can help you ask the questions that you need to ask to make sure that it's a viable investment.
Yeah, it definitely helps when you have people that know the trends and the way things have gone in the past,
Mhm.
because generally that's how they're going to go in the future. So I think it's interesting right now. Like Ebu, they were doing some really awesome research, and then they got gobbled up by Canopy for 300 million. And it really seemed like you really do have a short amount of time to invest in these companies, but then you really need to be smart before you do it. So I get it. Yeah, you definitely need a good team so you can attack things quickly.
Okay.
But I mean, due diligence, you should take a little bit of time, maybe. I don't know. I mean, how much time do you think one should spend?
That's different for everybody, and you do have to take I would say to you, the biggest mistake more money is lost in greed than in fear, and that's because people rush into decisions thinking that they're going to miss out. I would say, one of the telltale signs that you want to be careful, especially if it's a private deal, is be cautious if the owner of the enterprise or the CEO does a lot of takeaway closing on you about time frames, or if you feel pressured that they need the money, because probably they do if that's the case. So a lot of times it's just pacing those things and keeping your own emotions in check, so you don't that fear of missing out can really cause you to make big mistakes and rush and make decisions before you should.
I'm thinking about California companies and the fact that they all need money. Everyone is dying over here. Literally, the companies are just dying out. I mean, there was an article talking about how California is facing an extinction event because they're so behind on finishing applications and giving people their permanent licenses, and everybody's temporary licenses are about to expire. And then literally there will be nobody that is
Mhm.
legal to operate. So it's a catch 22 where, yeah, if they're like really needing money, that's probably because they really need money. But I don't think necessarily that that's a negative thing. I think you just have to make sure that they have a good track record, or they're viable in the future. And this isn't like they're just trying to survive, and the amount they're asking for will only get them so far before they're in this problem again.
And the larger economic cycles help too, in the sense that when you have a emerging industry like this and the overall economy is expanding, that's very helpful because that means there's plenty of capital in any new industry. The reason most businesses fail is because they run out of capital. They're undercapitalized. So right now, capital is available. So that means that in most viable enterprises that make sense have a shot at happening, because there is an interest from investors and capital is there. If this was 2008, it would be a completely different story because the capital wouldn't have been available then. But right now, in my humble opinion, I think you've got another 2 years of that kind of environment to where this industry probably benefits from that.
We started talking about doing this series about the CBD industry and what happened after the Farm Bill, and I can't remember if we ever actually got into that. But the hemp industry is a different beast now because it's not under the Controlled Substances Act, and it
Hmm.
has been legalized nationally, even though you still have to get permits in whatever state. So you can't really just start growing hemp.
Yeah.
But now that it's been legalized nationally, when do you think hemp will be globalized?
It's already happening, and I think that's a great example of be careful of what you ask for as an investor, because everybody did want that farm bill and did want that legalization, and everybody who was early as a hemp or CBD investor was thinking, "Boy, we're going to make a fortune," and they still may make some very good money. But the reality is now you have globalization starting right here and now. And now here's a plant that can be imported from other countries. There's really no barrier to entry anymore to growing. Now, there's some things that people forget, that there's certain, there's a process that you do have to go through to be able to grow hemp. But outside of that, for the most part, now you're in a business that is very competitive. And so if you invested in a very small hemp CBD operation, chances, unless it gets bought out fairly soon, chances are it's going to have a tough time operating, because now you're going to have all kinds of large dollar amounts coming in and much larger facilities being built out, and the price of growing hemp is going to decline rapidly and over the next couple years. So I just think that globalization it starts now, and you see it
Yeah.
happen very fast.
I was just, someone just told me, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's a Canadian pharmaceutical company called Instadose Pharma, IDP. And they announced at the end of last year that they had a massive shipment of CBD oil coming to Canada. Let me look down here. So said they had, from rxleaf.com,
Mm-hmm.
IDP has announced that 2 million liters of CBD oil will hit the market this year, with its starting shipment coming in at 90,000 liters. While many Canadian companies were looking inwards or towards our southern neighbors, IDP decided to turn to the rest of the globe. In doing so, they struck up deals with cooperatives and communities of farmers in Colombia and the DRC. So they're talking about this 2 million liters of CBD, which I don't know, man, that sounds kind of crazy. But they're saying that it's supposed to bring the cost down by 96.3% by flooding Canada with CBD.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. Like, I don't even know if that's real. I would really like to see it, because this was announced in December. It's March, and I don't think that anything has happened yet. But this is perfect example of a company that was like, we're not going to use Canada. Let's go to South Africa or South America and just have them grow it. This is what we're up against. Right now, the U.S. is not importing or exporting hemp, but Canada is, and Mexico is. And so once we do, we're totally screwed, right?
Yeah, you would think so. You would think that, and there again, that's big players will be the ones that play in that space, because they'll probably be the only ones that can afford to. No doubt there'll be a lot of demand for isolate CBD. I mean, just today it was Jelly Bellies announced that they're going to do 16 flavors with CBD in them. So no doubt their stuff is going to be everywhere, even in silly places like in water. And so but I just, from an investor standpoint, I would say that it's hard to have an edge. And there again, if I was going to invest in a hemp cultivation or a CBD processing plant, whatever it may be, I definitely would look for something that was large in scale and would be able to compete when prices come down.
I'm curious if, like with any industry in another country, where oftentimes the workers are exploited and they don't have good working conditions, and we see it with Nike and with soy and with whatever. Everything basically gets undercut in other third world countries. So I wonder if, does that matter to investors when they're looking at companies? Where are they getting, who are their importer partners, and what kind of business practices do they have? Does that matter for investors? Can that affect your investment? Because I would like to think so, but it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, it should. Now, do the investors ask those questions? Does it?
Should they ask those questions?
They should. Yeah, absolutely. And the reason they should is because if they don't, they may have a rude, embarrassing awakening at some point in the future when they find out one of their investments was doing something, off color. So, so especially when they're manufacturing out of the country or whatever it may be. So it should be an important question for investors to know the source of the production. But whether that's happening or not, I don't know.
Is there a place where these other companies in other countries that might not be these big companies, but they're working with bigger companies, do those companies ever seek investors, or is it mainly just the really large companies?
No, almost every company seeks out investors. It's just what kind of investors are they? Um, are they are they large institutions like pension companies and such? Well, that's going to be typically only in the legal sector, or are they going to be smaller family offices or individual investors, which tends to be more of what you see in the cannabis space right now. So that that makes a big distinction difference too, because the larger the institution, the more mandates they're going to have around the money they invest, and the more sensitive they're going to be about things.
It's just so interesting to think about it just by looking at other commodities and where they're at. And it's to me, it's kind of different when it comes to high THC cannabis because there's a culture attached to it, and there's medicine, there's spiritual for some people. I mean, it has so many different factors to it that I wonder what's going to happen when it's globalized. What's going to happen to the culture? And something we've talked about is the brands and the quality. It's very important that these companies maintain these. Do you see that things get better or worse when companies spread out their reach to an international market?
I think worse in the sense that, my concern for the cannabis space, and I hope that more and more people create brands or create some kind of pushback to keep the culture in cannabis. And the reason I say that is just recently I was sitting with somebody who's been a cannabis connoisseur for 35, 40 years, and a gentleman in his mid 60s, and he says to me, he goes, back in the day, High Times is where I found out how to grow. He goes, that was the only place I could go to get any knowledge. And he goes, and now there's nowhere to go to get that kind of knowledge about growing and strains, and all these different things that allowed him to be such a great grower that he is today. And we got into that conversation as, do you, when as more companies come in and it becomes just commoditized, do you lose a whole generation that loses touch with the original parts of the plant and what was important to it? And it sure does feel that that's a very big, not only possibility, but probability. And it's going to take a lot of good cannabis warriors to kind of keep some roots to the industry.
Is there other commodities where there is a black market and a legal market? Because I wonder if that's more unique to cannabis, especially in California or other places. Oh, sorry. Can you hear the sirens? I'm going to start over.
No problem.
Like the downfall of living next to a fire station.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Okay. In regards to cannabis having a thriving black market right now because it's overtaxed, it's not available in 2/3 of the state because no one wants to regulate it in the cities and counties in California, then there will always be a black market, right? Are there other commodities where they've been globalized, but there's a local black market for it?
I'm sure there has been, but I don't think there's anything this size. This is completely different. This is tectonic shift as far as this is a plant that has been available to everyone and is available to everywhere, and the everybody, when they finally realized that they've been lied to for so many years, they said, "Oh, geez, thank God, now we can be real." Right. So this is a very unique situation culturally and from a socioeconomic standpoint. It's never been seen before.
Cool. How fun. I mean, how scary for some investors that are not in their realm because this is not like anything else. And I find solace in thinking that the black market is the culture and we're not going anywhere and we're not paying taxes either. So I think we'll be okay, actually, unless it gets like very enforced and it becomes scary or dangerous or when we're not allowed to grow at home anymore or something like that. I mean, that would really screw everybody. So I think it's just, you can invest in the public companies, you can try to catch the private companies before they get rolled up, but you can still be a part of the culture without losing your soul, hopefully.
I agree. Yeah, I hope so.
Yes. So is there anything else? I think we kind of covered it for globalization. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it. I think that covers all the things we were hoping to.
Okay, great. So where can people find you?
Quiverfinancial.com. Quiver like a quiver of arrows. Quiverfinancial.com.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for tuning in. We will be back with the regular season this summer. So in the meantime, stay healthy, be good. Thanks.
Have a good one. Thanks.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast host. It really helps us get the truth out to a larger audience. You can follow us on Instagram at CannabiSPod and on LinkedIn at the Cannabis Detector. Show notes and links to articles referenced in this episode are available on our website, cannabispod.com. Is there a topic you want to hear, or do you have some BS you'd like to tell our audience? Send us a message on Instagram at CannabisPod. Stay skeptical.